I was about 18 when I got pregnant the first time. Um, I was living at home with my mom. My parents had just got divorced. This was in Michigan, where I grew up, just outside of Detroit. And I had a boyfriend at the time. I think we dated maybe 4 months until, I realized I was pregnant. And I think it was just at the time even though I was raised, I wasn't actually raised a Catholic, but I went to a Catholic high school and went to church sometimes with my mom, who was raised Catholic. But it was actually my mom who kind of walked me through the options, abortion being one of them. So and at first I wanted to have the baby, but then I think I realized, or at the time I thought it wasn't going to be a good idea because my life situation wasn't settled, things like that. So I kind of reasoned my way to having that abortion. I didn't really get any alternative options for different routes I could have gone down. I think the reason for that is because my own mom had an abortion herself for basically the same reasons. She was married quite young, at about 18. She had 3 kids. She got divorced, and then at that time, I guess she decided, I'm going to go live my life, and she ended up getting pregnant with somebody irrelevant to her at the time. I mean, I hate to put it like that, but and so she thought it would be a similar situation. But I never heard anybody else mention, you could put it up for adoption or you could have it. There wasn't really any talk of that at all, any support for other options. The day that I was booked in to have the abortion appointment, my mother took me. It was strangely this large office building in the middle of this really industrial area. I thought I would see some people outside with signs and placards and things like that, but I didn't see anybody. It was very clinical. I answered some questions. I think I had to see an ultrasound at the time. I don't know if they still make people do that. But, and I was, taken in to a table, and there was this machine. It was like a vacuum, and I remember just kind of zoning out and trying not to think about what was happening at the time. And I remember I woke up in a room with a lot of other women in the same position. And I remember they just had, I don't know why, I just remember they had given us blue paper blankets, and you would just lay there, and I could hear people crying, and I was crying, and you just don't forget that, or it stays with you. I think when I think back after to what I was thinking about it, I think I felt like there was a sense of relief in that a problem that was once there didn't exist anymore, but as time went on, I kind of realized that that itself became the problem. And that's you think back, I remember little things because it was quite a long time ago, but I remember being affected by seeing ads about nappies and things like that, and friends that would have their own children, and so that would be little things like that would trigger me a bit. My immediate family and like a couple of my close friends knew about it, because then after that I had this like year-long period of time where I just kind of went crazy, just doing a lot of silly things that didn't make sense, and kind of almost became homeless at one point. I think now, looking back, it was probably something I was trying to punish myself for, which led again to another abortion. I remember when I was still kind of recovering in the beginning from the first abortion, my mother told me something like, be careful, because women that have one abortion, usually there's like some statistic where they'll go on to have 2 abortions. And I thought, no, that won't be me. But I didn't, like I said, there was a period of time where I kind of went off the rails, and I ended up, I was in a relationship, I was still only about 19, and just, it was a boyfriend at the time, and it wasn't something I planned. There was even birth control involved that failed. So it was something I was faced with again. I had to consider what to do, and it was a very similar situation. It was just like a feeling like I wasn't settled. I couldn't do it by myself. I didn't want to give my children or child an unstable life, to where I didn't know whether or not the father would be involved, that kind of thing. I was still young. I didn't really have an education of much, no saleable skills. So it was just, I think I thought, well, I was actually in a worse situation, because like I said, I was kind of homeless in a way. And so I just thought, well, there's, I've done this before, I'll do it again. And again, there was nobody at the door. I was thinking there would be, but it was basically the similar situation. I think it might have even been the same place. And that time it was, I was driven there by the father, who was probably himself only about 18 at the time. And same situation. And I remember, it's sad because I remember meeting up with him a couple years later, and he mentioned that I think after me, he had dated another 2 women who he had gotten pregnant, and they were both abortions as well. So I mean, I think people just don't learn sometimes. They don't consider. I think if somebody had been outside, I don't know how it would have impacted the decision, but I expected somebody to be there. I expected to be kind of confronted about it. Or just, somebody there trying to make a difference somehow. I don't know if it would have made a difference, but it might have. When you hear about these laws where they're trying to install these buffer zones, I can understand what their aim is, but it's not something that I think people need to have that that voice just saying, like, are you sure? Even just somebody, their presence. I'm not I'm not one for, the big signs with, the really graphic images. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, like, somebody there who is trying to say there's another thing that there's other things you can do, and not something that's gonna stay with you forever, even though you think that you're solving a problem there and then. It's it's important to have people there just telling you that it's not going to be over. For a long time I was kind of unable to really think about the actual decision of having those 2 abortions. I think I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell people about it. And it was just something I didn't emotionally want to confront ever. But then as the years went by, I think you just change somehow as a person, and I know I'm nothing like I was when I was 18 or 19, and your values change as well, because when I had my kids, I started going back to church, and it was a lot more involved than I was ever before. And the pro-life movement for Catholics is quite a main issue. I mean, it is for other Christians as well, but for Catholics, it's like it's a pretty important thing. So I just went through this process of thinking about the decisions that I made and why, and then kind of allowing myself to kind of confront what happened, and there was a lot of guilt and a lot of anger at myself. And I remember thinking, for me, there was a big issue with feeling like a hypocrite, because I didn't feel like, for a long time, I didn't feel like I could be somebody who could change their mind and say like, oh, well, I'm pro-life now because I've had 2 abortions, so that, you know, I just thought, well, who am I to say something like that, because I've had 2 abortions. So who am I to say like, oh, it's wrong, you shouldn't do it. But I just I came to this conclusion that people can change, and what you think that you know at the time that influences your decision, that changes as well. You know, you end up learning more over the course of your life, whereas you might have made a different decision if you had more facts, more support. So it's just about allowing yourself to move on and be okay with having made the wrong decision before, but looking back and saying, you know, I could have done better. Once I had started attending church again, I started to recognize that there were these pro-life initiatives in my parish. And so I started looking into it, and again, this was through my whole kind of self-argument about whether I could, you know, change, and, you know, or whether it would be hypocritical. I went through a lot of web surfing, and I found about a group called Silent No More. I think because I typed in I regret my abortion, and that came up with Silent No More, but they didn't actually have any more UK branches over here. I guess they haven't for a while, but they put me in touch with Rachel's Vineyards, and that was the first time in about 20 years where I actually began talking about it openly. And once I started talking about it, it's like I couldn't stop talking about it. But then afterwards, it was useful to have that going forward and think, you know, you can think about these children, these aborted children, and know that they're still your children, even if they're not around anymore. And that's how Rachel's Vineyard kind of tries to promote people to think about it like that, because they were children, not just a clump of cells or however they term it to make it acceptable. So it was difficult, but it was really, I think cathartic is the word. I mean, if I met somebody who was going through something similar, or they've been through something similar and is looking to, process through that grief, because that's what it is, it's grief. I would say, that's what Rachel's Vineyard is for. There's a lot of people who are very supportive, and there are people who have been through it before, not just, it's nice when you have people that haven't even been through it and they still want to support people, but there's hundreds of, worldwide, there's thousands of people who are struggling with the same thing. And you don't have to struggle by yourself. You can get help. And I didn't talk about my experiences for 20 years, and now I'm able to speak about it. So that's proof that people are there to help. Shortly after I was involved in the Rachel's Vineyard retreat, I actually I began a relationship with somebody that I had met at church, and I thought I was gonna marry the person, and it was very positive for a while, and then as you can see, I'm not married and I'm pregnant, so you can kind of put two and two together. And it just goes to show that it can still happen even if you're in your 40s. And I think for me it was almost as if it was being tested, because the situation was still the same. It was a very chaotic relationship. I was more stable than I was back when I was 18 or so, but it wasn't an easygoing relationship. It was very rocky. Sometimes I didn't even know if I would be talking to the dad. So a lot of the same kinds of questions came up. And I think because I knew I had an abortion before, I thought, well, it's still an option. But I talked to Rachel from Rachel's Vineyard, and she said something that just kind of clicked for me. And she just said, well, you won't survive a third one. And I think that was true because, you can talk yourself into anything. And this is not a world that asks you to have a conscience about things outside of yourself. And it's a world that tells you to just think of yourself and not about somebody else. So even though I had been through that weekend and knew, how horrible I felt about having two already, I still, in the back of my mind, I thought, well, if need be, I could do that. But then part of me, I just thought, no, I'll never be able to do that again. So I think with people that do try to support people, it's fine for somebody to say, like, well, you'll be a murderer or this or that, but it's like I said, for somebody that is living in a world that doesn't even allow it to be called a baby, you know, you can put up walls and not see that, and you can not allow yourself to be convicted. So I don't think that kind of thing really works. But for me, having the experience of already knowing the pain that comes from it, that to me, when Rachel said, you won't survive it, that to me is what made it like real for me. There's a phrase I've seen where women who have had abortions and then try to tell other women about their experiences. They say, abortion, one heart stops and another breaks. And to me, that's my experience. And I knew I couldn't do it again because my heart would not recover from that again. I think one thing I know now that I didn't know back then is that I know what is expected of parenthood, you know, and I see my kids now as people. If I thought about myself back then, if I could go back now and say to myself then, or even to somebody else who was going through something similar, I would just say, this decision is not going to be something that goes away. So you either make it be something that stays with you, where you have this little life who is a part of you. You either have that with that person, or you have it without them. And without them, it's just a life of wondering, what if? And could I have made it? You will make it. If you, like I said, if you make that decision, as soon as you make that commitment, the entire universe conspires to assist you. And all you have to do is have a little faith.